The morning began like any other, quiet and slow, with soft sunlight falling across a narrow street that most people passed without noticing. It was a place where life moved at a steady pace, not hurried by big dreams or large ambitions. Small shops opened their shutters one by one. The smell of fresh tea mixed with dust in the air, and people greeted each other with tired smiles before starting another long day. Among them was a man who appeared completely ordinary. His clothes were simple. His shoes were clean but worn. Nothing about him suggested power, influence, or wealth. No driver waited nearby. No assistants followed him. If anyone looked at him, they would assume he was just another person trying to pass time, for work, or maybe someone waiting to meet a friend. But in reality, he carried a life few could imagine. He was a billionaire who had built his fortune through years of sharp decisions, risk, and patience. Yet money had long stopped exciting him. He had everything people thought they wanted: luxury homes, private flights, global influence. But what he struggled to find was something far more rare: honesty without reward, kindness without intention, and integrity when no one was watching. Over time, he had developed a habit. He would leave his world of glass offices and luxury resorts and step into ordinary settings. Not to show off or seek praise, but to observe. He believed true character revealed itself in small, everyday moments. Not in speeches, not in planned interviews, but in choices people made when they believed nothing was at stake. That day he chose this street for no special reason. No plans, no expectations. Just curiosity. He walked slowly, taking in the simple life around him. A shopkeeper arguing over change. A woman scolding her child for being late. An older man sitting on a stool, staring at nothing in particular, as if lost in thought. Life was raw here, real. Untouched by filters or pretensions, he stopped near a small place where people usually came for quick meals. Nothing fancy. Just basic food. Wooden benches and a counter worn smooth from years of use. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The room was half full. Some people ate, quietly, lost in their thoughts. Others talked in low voices. A small fan hummed overhead, moving warm air around. No one looked up when he entered, and that was how he preferred it. He took a seat near the corner. Not hidden, but not central either. A place to watch without being noticed. As he sat there, a thought crossed his mind. He had not planned a test, not today, but habit had trained his mind well. Opportunities often appeared when one stayed observant. He ordered something simple. When it arrived, he began eating slowly. He noticed the way people interacted with the workers. Some spoke politely. Some barely acknowledged them. Others treated them like they did not exist at all. He noticed how easily respect vanished when people believed they were above others. A few minutes later, the moment came. A small mistake happened at the counter. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough that it could be ignored or exploited. A quiet error that would cost the business a little money if no one spoke up. The billionaire noticed it. Immediately. He leaned back slightly, watching. Would anyone say something? Or would everyone stay silent? One man noticed but turned away. Another glanced at it, hesitated, and chose not to get involved. A third shook his head slightly, almost disappointed, but still said nothing. The billionaire felt no surprise. He had seen this many times before. Silence was common. Honesty, less so. His eyes moved across the room. And that's when he noticed one person who reacted differently. This person wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no attempt to gain attention or respect. Instead, they quietly stepped closer to the counter and spoke in a low, respectful voice. The words were simple, but the intention was clear. They wanted to correct the mistake. Not because anyone was watching, not because they expected praise, but because it felt like the right thing to do. The business owner paused, looked confused at first, then realized what had happened. A small moment of relief crossed their face. They nodded with gratitude, fixed the error, and moved on. The person returned to their seat as if nothing important had happened. But for the billionaire, everything changed in that instant. He didn't smile. He didn't react outwardly, but something inside him shifted. It was that quiet choice, the one no one appreciated, the one that brought no reward, that caught his attention. He studied the person carefully without staring. Their clothes were plain, their posture tired. Their face carried signs of someone who had known struggle and disappointment. Yet there was no bitterness in their expression, just calm acceptance. The billionaire finished his meal slowly. Giving himself time to think, he asked himself a question he had asked many times before. But each time it felt just as important. Who is this person when no one important is watching? That small moment had already given him part of the answer. Still, he wanted to know more. Not their background, not their education, not their dreams, but their mindset. As he stood up to leave, he walked toward the counter to settle his bill. On the way, he paused briefly near the person who had spoken up earlier. He didn't reveal anything. He didn't praise or thank them. Instead, he made a simple comment, something ordinary, the kind of line strangers exchange every day. The person replied politely. Their tone was natural, without curiosity or flattery. They did not ask questions. They did not push conversation. Just a normal response? That, too, mattered. Outside, the billionaire stopped for a moment. The street felt the same as before, noisy but alive. Yet to him, the day already felt different. He had not planned a test. But one had appeared, and someone had passed it without ever knowing it existed. As he walked away, he felt something unexpected: hope. Not the shallow kind tied to success or achievement, but a deeper one. The kind that reminded him why he once started his journey in the first place. The belief that good decisions, even small ones, still existed in a world obsessed with gain. That small, almost invisible moment stayed with him. It followed him through the street, through the noise, into his thoughts. He knew one thing for sure. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The rest of the day moved forward. But the moment from earlier refused to leave the billionaire's thoughts. He tried to focus on other things, walking through nearby streets, watching people hurry past with their worries and plans. Yet his mind kept returning to that simple act of honesty. It wasn't the correction itself that stayed with him. It was how calmly it was done. No hesitation seeking approval. No pride. No fear of looking foolish. Just a quiet decision made because it felt right. He had spent his life surrounded by people who behaved differently once they knew who he was. Words became sweeter. Smiles came faster. Truth slowly disappeared. Over time, he learned that the most valuable conversations happened when his identity stayed hidden. That afternoon, he sat on a bench near the edge of the street, pretending to scroll through his phone while watching the world in front of him. The place buzzed with activity. People came and went. Arguments flared and ended. Laughter spilled from corners where friends met, and then he saw the same person again. They were walking out of a nearby shop, holding a small bag, their steps steady but tired. The billionaire noticed the slow pace, the slightly lowered shoulders. It was the posture of someone used to carrying responsibilities alone. He didn't rush. He waited until the moment felt natural, then stood and followed at a distance. Not out of suspicion, but curiosity. He wanted to see how this person moved through the world. When no one was watching, they stopped briefly to let an older person pass. They stepped aside instead of pushing forward. When someone dropped something, they pointed it out without making a scene. Small actions, barely noticed by others. But to him, they spoke loudly. The billionaire felt something unfamiliar. Respect. Not because of success or talent, but because of consistency. He decided to speak again, this time a little more as they both reached a small tea stall. He casually stood beside them and ordered the same drink. He made a remark about the heat and the long day. It was the kind of comment anyone could make. The person replied simply, agreeing, adding a few words about work and time passing too quickly. Nothing dramatic. No attempt to sound impressive. They talked for a minute, then two. The conversation stayed light, yet something meaningful rested beneath it. When the billionaire mentioned how people sometimes ignored small responsibilities, The person nodded slowly and said something that struck him deeply. If you see something wrong and can fix it, you should. Even if no one thanks you, you still go home lighter. The words landed quietly but firmly. The billionaire looked at him, surprised by how much truth fit into such simple language. He realized this person had thought deeply about life, not through books or theories, but through experience. He asked a few gentle questions, careful not to push. About work, about daily routines. The answers were honest, modest, and free of complaint. There was struggle, but no anger. There was fatigue, but also acceptance. What stood out most was what they didn't say. No blaming, no bitterness, no jealousy toward those living easier lives. The billionaire felt the familiar urge to test again, but this time differently. Not with money or mistakes, but with conversation. He shared a small, altered story about a business owner facing pressure, unsure whether to choose profit or fairness. He asked what choice should be made. The response came slowly, thoughtfully. Shortcuts look good at first, the person said, but they follow you. Even when money comes easy, sleep doesn't. I'd rather struggle honestly than succeed with a bad taste. That sentence stayed between them. The billionaire had spoken with world leaders who dodged questions and hid motives. Here was someone who spoke plainly, without guard or agenda. For a moment, he considered revealing who he was right then. The thought passed quickly. It was too soon. Trust built slowly, and he didn't want the balance to shift. They finished their tea. The person paid for their own drink without hesitation, even though the billionaire quietly offered. There was no pride in refusing, just independence. Before parting ways, the billionaire asked one final question, phrased casually. Do you ever think being honest costs more than it gives back? The person smiled faintly, the kind of smile shaped by lived experience. Sometimes, they answered, but losing yourself costs more. They parted with a short wave and nothing more. The billionaire stood there long after, the street noise flowing around him. That answer echoed louder than anything he had heard all year. He walked away slowly, feeling a mix of calm and excitement. He knew he had found something rare, though he didn't yet know what he would do with it. That night, back in his quiet hotel room, he sat alone by the window, watching city lights blink like distant thoughts. The comfort around him felt heavy instead of relaxing. He thought about wealth, power, and influence. Then he thought about character, quiet strength, and the choices people made when life gave them nothing extra. He understood something very clearly then. Some people carried value long before opportunity ever found them, and when opportunity finally arrived, it could change everything. The small test had already turned into something more, and the moment that followed would change both their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The next morning arrived quietly. The city was still waking up, stretching itself into another long day. From his hotel window, the billionaire watched the streets below fill with movement. Cars, bikes, people rushing with purpose. Everyone seemed to be heading somewhere. It's important. Yet his thoughts were fixed on just one person. He had met countless people in his life. Some impressive, some powerful, many confident. But rarely had someone stayed in his mind the way this person did. Not because of words spoken, but because of how naturally those words matched actions. He finished his breakfast without appetite and left the hotel early. There was no meeting scheduled, no calls waiting. For once, he had cleared his time for something that did not involve profit or strategy. He returned to the same street this time. He didn't pretend it was chance. He knew where to go and what to look for. He sat at a small place across the road, ordering tea and waiting patiently. Time passed slowly. He observed faces, gestures, habits. Then he saw them. They arrived with the quiet confidence of routine. There was no rush, no hesitation, just a steady walk, as if this street was part of their daily life. The billionaire noticed the same tired shoulders, the same calm expression. He waited until the moment felt right, then crossed the road and greeted them warmly, like someone who was simply happy to see a familiar face. The surprise was mutual, but comfortable. They spoke briefly about the day ahead, about work and responsibilities. The conversation flowed easily, without force. After a few minutes, the billionaire made a casual suggestion. "I have some time this morning," he said. "If you don't mind, we could walk a bit. The weather's decent." The person hesitated for half a second, then agreed. There was no suspicion, only openness. They walked side by side, not too close, not distant either. As they moved through the street, the billionaire kept his pace matched, careful not to lead or follow. He wanted the conversation to unfold naturally. He asked about their work in a genuine tone. The answer was simple. Long hours, modest pay, responsibilities that didn't always match the reward. But there was no complaint hidden underneath.
"Work is work," the person said.
"It's not always kind, but it keeps life moving." That lack of resentment stood out. The billionaire asked about dreams softly. As if unsure whether to ask at all, the response came with a short pause. "I don't dream loudly," they said. "Mostly, I just hope for peace, and enough stability to take care of my people." That answer held weight. Not flashy, not ambitious by common standards, yet deeply grounded. As they walked, the billionaire saw moments others would miss. A greeting offered to a shop worker. Space made for someone in a hurry. A door held open without thought. He remembered how people behaved in boardrooms. Sharp elbows, louder voices trying to dominate. Here's strength showed itself differently. They sat briefly on a low wall near a quiet corner. The billionaire decided to try something he rarely did. He spoke about pressure, not his own, but in general. About people forced into unfair choices. About systems that rewarded the wrong behavior. He asked how someone should survive in such a world. The answer didn't come immediately. "You bend where you must," the person said slowly, "but you don't break. If staying honest costs you comfort, you accept the discomfort. Your name is the only thing you truly own." The billionaire felt that sentence settle deep. He nodded, hiding the impact. Then came the test. It wasn't money. It wasn't a trap. It was something simpler, yet harder. A man approached them while they sat. His tone was frustrated. He complained about a nearby issue, exaggerating details, hoping for agreement. He wanted support to push blame onto someone else. The billionaire stayed quiet. The person listened calmly, then responded gently, but firmly, correcting the exaggeration without shaming. They didn't fully agree, nor did they dismiss the concern. They pointed out facts and suggested a fair approach. The man left, unsatisfied but thoughtful. The billionaire felt something click into place. This wasn't coincidence anymore. Later, as they continued walking, the billionaire pretended to receive a call. He walked a few steps ahead, speaking quietly. On purpose, he left behind a small amount of cash on the low wall where they had been sitting. He returned moments later. Acting unaware, the person noticed the money immediately, without hesitation. They picked it up and handed it back. "You dropped this," they said. No pause. No glance around. No question. The billionaire took it slowly, meeting their eyes. "Thank you," he replied simply. That was the moment certainty replaced curiosity. They reached a busy crossing and stopped. It felt like a natural end to the walk. The billionaire knew he would soon need to choose his next step. As they stood there, noise filling the space between them, he asked one last question. "If life gave you an unexpected door," he said, "would you be afraid to open it?" The person looked at the street ahead. "I'd be careful," they replied, "but I wouldn't ignore it." They shook hands lightly before partying. The billionaire stood watching as the person disappeared into the crowd. For the first time in a long while, he felt certain about something that had nothing to do with numbers or contracts. He returned to his car and sat in silence. That small test had grown into absolute clarity. The next step would change everything. But not yet. Some moments needed time to breathe. The following days passed quietly, yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. For the billionaire, every familiar comfort felt distant. The quiet hotel room, the smooth service, the constant attention from staff, all of it felt strangely empty. His thoughts kept circling back to the same question. What happens when rare character meets real opportunity? He knew he couldn't rush what came next. Some truths lost their meaning when revealed too suddenly. So instead, he planned one more step. Not a trick, but a chance. Something real enough to matter. On the other side of the city, the person he had met was back to routine. Work began early, ended late, and brought little appreciation. Responsibilities waited at home. Bills, quiet worries. Still, there was no complaint. Life was accepted as it came. When a call arrived later that week from an unknown number, it caused mild confusion. The voice on the other end sounded familiar but calm. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," the billionaire said. "We crossed paths recently. I wondered if you'd be open to meeting again." There was a short pause. Surprise, then recognition. "Yes," came the answer. "I can make time." They agreed to meet in a modest place, far removed from influence or display. No luxury, no signs of power. Just a quiet room with old chairs and filtered light coming through dusty windows. When the person arrived, they noticed nothing unusual. The billionaire was already there, dressed simply, standing by the window. They spoke for a moment about small things. Then silence settled between them. The billionaire broke it gently. "I want to be clear," he said. "What I'm about to talk about isn't a promise. It's a conversation." The person nodded. "I work with businesses," the billionaire continued. "Sometimes I help improve systems. Sometimes I listen before I act." There was no exaggeration in his voice. No attempt to impress. "I've been thinking about our conversations," he added. "About choices people make when it's easier to look away." The person listened, focused, but relaxed. "I want your opinion," the billionaire said. "Imagine you're given responsibility, not power, just responsibility. You notice small problems others ignore. If speaking up puts your position at risk, what do? The answer didn't come quickly. "I'd speak up carefully," the person said. "Not to attack, not to embarrass. But silence only feeds the problem. If speaking up costs you something, then at least I lose it honestly." The billionaire leaned back, studying the face across from him, not searching for the right answer, but for consistency. He felt it again. That certainty. He decided it was time. He stood and walked to the door, locking it gently. Not to intimidate, but to give privacy. He returned and sat quietly. "There's something I didn't share before," he said, "because I didn't want it to change how you spoke to me." The person stiffened slightly, but remained calm. "I'm not just someone who advises businesses," the billionaire continued. "I own several," the words landed slowly. "I oversee large investments. Thousands of people depend on decisions I make, even if they never see my face." Confusion crossed the person's expression, followed by discomfort. "Why tell me this?" they asked. "Because I've been looking for someone I can trust before they have a reason to impress me." The room felt quieter. The billionaire reached into his bag and placed a thin folder on the table. No logos, no dramatic branding. "Inside is a proposal," he said, "not a contract. An opportunity to observe, question, and help improve a small operation I manage." The person didn't touch it. "How small?" they asked. "Small enough to reveal habits," the billionaire replied. "Big enough to matter." Silence followed. "I'm not offering money today," he continued. "Only responsibility and exposure. You can walk away and nothing changes." The person finally opened the folder. Their hands were steady, but their breathing slowed. The opportunity was real, the possibility unmistakable. "This is a big step," they said quietly. "For someone like me, for someone with your mindset," the billionaire corrected. The person looked up. "Why me?" The billionaire answered without pause. "Because you returned money that wasn't yours. Because you corrected a mistake that didn't affect you. Because you spoke truth without knowing who I was." He paused. Skills can be taught. Values cannot. Motion flickered briefly across the person's face. Not excitement, not fear, but weight. The kind that comes when life offers a door you never expected. They closed the folder gently. "I need time," he said. "I'd worry if you didn't," the billionaire replied. They stood. No handshake. Just a shared understanding, as the person left. The billionaire remained seated. He didn't feel triumph. He felt relief. The test was no longer small, and the moment ahead would change everything. The days that followed were heavy with thought. The offer stayed on the table, quiet but powerful, like a letter that changed meaning every time it was reread. Life did not pause. Work continued. Responsibilities waited. Yet something inside no longer felt settled. At night, the person lay awake, staring into darkness, weighing risk against routine. Turning it down would mean safety, predictability, and familiarity. Accepting it would mean stepping into the unknown. Where mistakes would matter and expectations would be real, it wasn't fear of failure that caused hesitation. It was fear of changing. On the third day, the person returned to the same street where everything had begun. The small place was there as always. The same sounds, the same worn benches, a reminder of how ordinary moments could carry weight without warning. They sat quietly, watching people come and go, remembering how icily that first choice had been made, correcting a simple mistake, returning money, speaking the truth without reward. Those actions had felt natural then. They still did now, by evening. The decision was clear. The next morning, the billionaire was already waiting when the door opened. He looked up, not surprised, just attentive. "I've thought about it," the person said, standing still. "I don't know if I'm ready," the billionaire nodded. "Being ready isn't required. Being honest is." "I'll try," they said. "That's all I can promise." "That's enough," the billionaire replied. What followed was not a sudden leap into luxury. There was no dramatic office reveal, no applause, no instant success. Instead, there was work. The assignment was simple. On paper, observe, listen, report honestly. Ask questions others avoided. The environment was unfamiliar, structured, and demanding. At first, doubts whispered constantly. Was this a mistake? Would failure confirm every fear? But consistency carried them forward. They arrived early. They listened more than they spoke. They noticed details others ignored, not because it was required, but because it had always been their nature. Slowly, things shifted. Processes improved. Small inefficiencies disappeared. Tension softened. Truth surfaced without force. People felt heard without realizing why. The billionaire watched quietly. He didn't interfere. He didn't guide every step. He allowed space for growth. Knowing pressure revealed character more than comfort ever could. One evening, after weeks had passed, they sat across from each other again. "You didn't try to impress anyone," the billionaire said. "Why?" "Because pretending would have been easier than learning," came the reply. That answer settled something permanently. Opportunities widened gradually. Responsibility increased without ceremony. Trust grew without announcement, and then came the moment that mattered most. A situation arose where cutting corners would have saved time and money. The pressure was real. Eyes watched. Silence would have been rewarded. The person spoke up, calmly, clearly, without accusation. The result wasn't comfortable. There were long conversations, resistance, delay. But the choice was right. That night, the billionaire walked alone through the city, feeling lighter than he had in years. Not because profits were protected, but because something rarer had been proven. Integrity still existed, and when given room, it multiplied. Weeks later, as the person prepared to leave work, the billionaire stopped them. "You passed a test today," he said. The person looked confused. "I wasn't trying to. That's why it mattered," the billionaire replied. They stood in silence for a moment. "You know," billionaire continued, "most people change when life finally listens to them, and you. I learned that tests don't change people," he said softly. "They reveal them." The street outside glowed with evening light, the same kind of light that had been there at the beginning. Nothing looked different, yet everything was. The billionaire had found what wealth could never buy, and the person had discovered that the smallest choices made without audience could open doors no one ever expected. The moment was never about money. It was about character, and that changed everything. Life did not suddenly become easy after that turning point. In many ways, it became harder. The responsibilities grew heavier, the expectations clearer, and the room for mistakes smaller. What had once been simple work now carried consequences that affected real people. The person understood this quickly. They were no longer just observing. Their words were being listened to. Their suggestions were shaping decisions. Quiet habits that once went unnoticed were now setting an example, whether they wanted that attention or not. At first, the weight of it felt uncomfortable. There were mornings when doubt returned without warning, when familiar fears whispered that this path did not belong to them, when stepping back into old routines felt tempting, safe, and strangely comforting. But each time those thoughts came, they remembered why they had said yes in the first place, not for money, not for status, but for the chance to stay true to themselves, even when it mattered. The billionaire noticed these small internal battles long before anything was said out loud. Years of experience had taught him that growth rarely announced itself. It showed up in subtle ways, in pauses before choices, in the effort to listen instead of react. In the discipline to speak carefully, he didn't rush guidance. He allowed silence to do its work. Slowly, trust extended further. The person was invited into rooms they had never imagined entering. Meetings where voices competed for attention. Spaces where confident words often carried less truth than quiet ones. At first, they spoke little, preferring observation over opinion. That restraint stood out. When asked directly for input, answers came thoughtfully. No exaggeration. No attempt to match louder voices. Just clear reasoning grounded in fairness and common sense. Some resisted. Not everyone welcomed honesty. There were individuals who felt threatened by transparency. Others questioned background and experience. A few tried to test limits, hoping to expose weakness or provoke reaction. The person endured it calmly. Old habits carried them through. Listening before speaking. Standing firm without aggression. Walking away when arguments served no purpose. The billionaire watched. Every test confirmed what he already knew. One afternoon, a difficult situation unfolded. A report revealed a pattern of neglect that had been overlooked for years. Addressing it would be uncomfortable. Ignoring it would be easy. The matter landed quietly on the table during a meeting. Silence. Followed eyes. Shifted. No one seemed eager to lead. The person spoke up. Not loudly, not dramatically. They outlined the issue clearly, suggested steps to correct it, and acknowledged the effort it would take. There was no blame, only responsibility. Resistance came quickly. Excuses filled the air. This has always worked. It's not worth the cost. We'll deal with it later. The person listened, then responded calmly. If it keeps working, it's because people adapt to problems instead of fixing them. That doesn't mean the problem isn't real. The room fell quiet. The decision went forward. Change began that day. Not everyone was happy, but progress rarely asked permission. That evening, the person sat alone after everyone had left, staring at papers spread across the table. The room felt larger without voices. Responsibility settled heavier than usual. The billionaire entered quietly and took a seat across from them. "You handled that well?" he said. The person exhaled. "It didn't feel good." "It rarely does," the billionaire replied. "But it was necessary." There was a pause. "Do you ever doubt your decisions?" the person asked. The billionaire smiled faintly. "Every day. Anyone who says otherwise isn't paying attention." They shared a quiet moment of understanding. Outside of work, life began to shift too. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just slightly. Bills felt less overwhelming. Time felt a little less rushed. Conversations at home carried more ease. Still, the person remained grounded, careful not to let change move faster than values. They continued walking the same streets, eating at the same places, greeting the same faces. Nothing outward changed much, but inside, his confidence grew gradually. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind built on consistency. One day, they returned to the small place where the first moment had occurred. The owner recognized them and smiled. "You don't come around much anymore," he said kindly. "I'm around," came the reply. "Just working more." The owner laughed. "That's life." As they sat, the person noticed a familiar situation unfolding nearby. A small mistake. It's easy to ignore. Without thinking, they spoke up. The owner thanked them. Nothing else happened. No praise, no attention, and that felt right. Later that night, the billionaire reflected alone, watching city lights flicker beyond glass. He thought about how often wealth distracted from wisdom, how power distorted intention, and how rare it was to watch someone remain unchanged by opportunity. He realized something important. The test had never been about finding talent. It had been about restoring faith. Weeks turned into months. The organization functioned better. Not perfectly, but honestly. People felt safer speaking. Problems surfaced earlier. Solutions stayed grounded. The person grew into the role naturally, without losing the quiet humility that had defined them from the beginning. One evening, after a long day, the billionaire stopped them again. "I have something to tell you," he said. "Not as your employer, as someone who observed you before you ever knew my world." The person listened. "I started this because I believed values disappeared once money entered the room," the billionaire said slowly. "You proved me wrong." He paused. "Whatever path you choose from here, remember this. Opportunity doesn't change who you are. It reveals whether your habits were real." The person nodded. "I don't plan to forget," they said. Outside, the city continued moving. Ordinary, busy, unaware of the quiet story unfolding within it. The billionaire returned home that night lighter than he had been in years, and the person walked forward. Knowing one truth clearly, the smallest choices had shaped the biggest changes. Not because of luck, but because character had finally been seen. Time continued its steady march. And with it came challenges that could not be avoided. Growth always attracted attention, and attention invited pressure. The improvements being made were noticeable now. Systems worked better. People trusted processes more. Problems came to the surface sooner instead of being hidden away. Not everyone welcomed that change. Some felt exposed, others felt displaced. A few believed the balance they once controlled was slipping from their hands. Quiet resistance began to form, not loudly, not openly, in small delays, missteps, and whispered doubts. The person sensed it before anyone said a word. Years of navigating difficult spaces had sharpened that awareness. They noticed shorter responses, sudden pauses in meetings, and the way certain people avoided eye contact. None of it surprised them. Change always revealed who benefited from silence. Instead of reacting, they slowed down. They listened more carefully, documented details, asked questions politely but persistently. When decisions were challenged, they explained calmly. When frustration arose, they held steady. The billionaire observed quietly. He knew this phase well. It was the moment when ideals were tested not by mistakes, but by opposition. Many failed here, turning defensive or impatient. He waited to see which path would be chosen. The pressure intensified when an external issue surfaced. A delay in operations caused tension across teams. Deadlines tightened. Voices grew sharper. Blame began bouncing around the room. During a long meeting, frustration reached its peak. Solutions were rushed. Shortcuts suggested. Old habits tried to resurface. The person requested a pause. Just a pause. They stood slowly and spoke with a steady tone. "We can rush this and repeat the same cycle," they said. "Or we can fix what's actually broken. It will cost us time now or cost us more later." A few people rolled their eyes. Others crossed their arms. "This isn't practical," someone muttered. The person nodded. "Neither's pretending it didn't happen." Silence followed. The billionaire felt something close to pride, though he never named it that. The decision wasn't popular, but it was right. The delay was addressed properly. Losses were contained. Trust was preserved. Afterward, Backlash came quietly. Rumors, questions about authority, subtle attempts to undermine confidence. The person felt the weight of it during long evenings. It's not anger, but exhaustion. There were moments when continuing felt harder than walking away. One night, they sat alone, staring at messages left unanswered. Doubt crept in without warning. Was integrity worth isolation? The billionaire visited the next morning, not for a meeting, just for conversation. They walked together slowly, the way they had in the beginning. "Do you regret speaking up?" the billionaire asked gently. The person shook their head. "I regret how heavy it feels, but not the choice." "That feeling," the billionaire said, "means you're doing something honest." They stopped briefly. "When you were unknown," the billionaire continued, "your choices cost nothing. Now, they cost popularity. That's the real price of leadership." The words stayed. The tests didn't stop. In the weeks that followed, the person faced their hardest decision yet. A proposal came through that promised quick gains. On paper, it looked safe, but the details carried risk, hidden behind language that softened consequences. Approving it would earn approval. Questioning it would create friction. They reviewed it carefully. Twice, then again, they flagged concerns. Pushback followed immediately. "You're slowing things down. This is how growth works. You can't afford hesitation." The person stood firm. "I can't support this," they said calmly. "Not without changes." Then came the quiet threat. "If this fails, it reflects on you." The room waited, the person nodded, then let it. The billionaire made a call only he could make. The proposal was halted. A deeper review followed. The concerns proved valid, damage avoided. Some were relieved, others were exposed. The consequences were real, but fair. After that, something shifted. Resistance weakened, honesty gained ground. People spoke more freely, knowing they would be heard instead of punished. The person didn't celebrate. They returned to routine. Work continued. One evening, as the building emptied, they looked out the window, watching the city lights. The same lights that once felt distant now felt connected. They remembered the simple life from before, the small place, the quiet correction, the moment no one noticed. Nothing about who they were had changed. Only the stage had. The billionaire joined them again. "You've crossed an invisible line," he said, "from trusted to respected." The person replied softly, "I just did the same thing I always do." "That's why it worked," he answered. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the quiet battles fought within its walls. The test that began as something small had grown larger than either of them had imagined, and still, at its core, it remained the same. See the truth. Speak it gently. Stand by it when it matters.